This summer, members of the Green Party of England and Wales will be voting to elect a new executive, commonly known as GPEx. Now, voting will open on the 1st of August, and Bright Green is hoping to interview all of the candidates for all the different positions on GPEx between now and then. We have a candidate today for the chair position, but before I introduce them, I just have one thing to ask you to do, which is to scroll down and hit that subscribe button. If you hit subscribe, it helps Bright Green massively. It doesn't cost you a penny, and it means that you won't miss out on any of the other interviews we're putting out with the other candidates and any of the videos that we're putting out in the coming weeks and months. So please do hit subscribe and make sure that you get everything popping up in your little notifications, and you can keep on track of these elections. So without further ado, I'll introduce our candidate that is with us today. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Jon Nott. Jon, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Chris. The little thing on my computer just popped up to say record high temperatures. So climate change in action.
Absolutely. And I am suffering under the heat and no fan to keep the background noise to a minimum. So hopefully we will get through this. But it is very hot today. So to kick things off, I just have a hopefully straightforward question for you, which is why do you think that you'd make a good chair of GPEx?
So it's my experience, really. I've served on the current GPEx for the last 2.5 years as the party's finance coordinator and treasurer. But in my other voluntary capacities, I've chaired a number of boards of organisations that are very similar to the party. They're member-led campaigning organisations, where internal democracy and making the most of limited resources are absolutely critical. And in addition, in my professional career, I've been the chief executive of a number of those kind of organisations, a national youth charity for 10 years, and most relevantly in this case, the party itself in the run-up to the 2010 elections, when we obviously got Caroline Lucas elected as our first MP. So I've seen what the party needs from an effective executive from a staff side, and I've seen that in other similar organisations. And I've also led those boards in other organisations, not yet in the Green Party, but hopefully after this election will do. And so that combination of sort of seeing things from both sides and being able to bring in that experience from other organisations that the party can benefit from, I think is what I bring to the role.
So you mentioned there that you were previously chief exec of the Green Party. Now, the period in which you were in that role was at a time when the party was very, very different to how it is today. You know, the party around that time had, you know, around 10 to 15,000 members. Now you're looking at sort of over 40,000 members. The staff team was much, much smaller. And the whole thing was a completely different beast, really. So what do you think that your experience of previously leading the Green Party from a kind of staff member perspective can bring to the role of chair, given how different the party is now?
Well, I think that the critical thing around my experience of being the party's chief exec is if we go back to a little bit of history, I first joined the party in 1989 around the time of the European elections, when we had our fantastic result, but because of the broken electoral system, got no representation in the European Parliament. And as a result of that, the party saw a huge surge in membership, and everyone had high expectations for the 1992 general election. But we weren't able to meet those because back in those pre-internet days, literally the party didn't have enough staff to open all the membership applications and bank all the checks. And so the party just failed to capitalise on that surge of interest for logistical reasons. So my job as the party's chief exec in the run-up to 2010 was to put in place the infrastructure that would mean that a similar surge off the back of Caroline's election would not break the party's infrastructure and would mean that we were able to actually seize that opportunity. And I think we're in a similar situation now. We obviously did have that surge, not immediately after Caroline became elected, but in 2014, 2015, where the party went, as you say, from below 10,000 to over 50,000, actually, at one point up to almost 75,000 members. And that infrastructure that we put in place then was sufficient. It enabled the party to to capture that growth and to maximise it. We're now 10 years on. One of the things I'm most proud of my time as treasurer on GPEx is we've just invested significantly in replacing the system that we put in place when I was chief exec, which was the right system at the time. But as anyone who's ever used Civi, the predecessor to Action Network, will know, is not the right system for the party at the moment. And so no, we've done that piece of investment in a key area. But there are so many other areas where we need to invest in the party's infrastructure to support our political goals. And having gone through that experience once, I think that's where the relevance is, not the specific transition, but it's the principles of how you make change in a member-led organization. No, it's not like being the chair or the chief exec of an organization where you only have to persuade the people in the boardroom. You actually have to take the membership with you. And that's obviously not just the job of the chair, but it's a key part of the role of the chair to ensure that the whole party is behind the transformation that we need to make in order to achieve the political goals that we're ultimately all here to achieve.
So we can talk about one of those political goals. So at the moment, you know, at the time of recording this, the government is still very much in a state of crisis. There appear to be 400 candidates for the leader of the Conservative Party. We don't yet know who's going to be leading the Tories, and we don't yet know whether there's going to be a general election called following the Tory leadership election, or at some point in the next 1 year. Prior to the kind of 2024 deadline for that election taking place. Now, I've asked the candidates for elections coordinator, and of course, I'll be asking the candidates for deputy leader as well, how they see the route to getting the Green Party general election ready, so that we're not in a situation where for the fourth general election in a row, we fail to win a second parliamentary seat. Now, obviously, GPEx plays a really, really important role in getting the party ready for elections, as you kind of alluded to, in terms of putting in place the resources, the infrastructure that's needed to deliver that. So how do you think you can get the Green Party general election ready if you're elected as chair?
The most important thing, as anyone who's ever stood for election and or like yourself become elected as a councillor knows, is the work that's done early is worth many, many times more than the work that's done in the last few weeks of the campaign. It's not to doubt the amount of effort and work that's required on a polling day, but we all know that if you haven't knocked the doors in advance and you haven't got the people to call on polling day, you're not going to be able to turn out the vote. You're not going to win an election. And so similarly for a national election, we have to have the infrastructure in place. And since I was chief exec of the party, we now have an absolutely fantastic and huge, by the scale of those times, field team, and the support that team of professional election organisers is able to offer to volunteer members of the party, to activists and candidates up and down the country, has been behind the fantastic local election success we've seen over the last few years. And the work that team are doing, particularly the new posts that we've created in the last couple of years, so the local election manager and the general election manager, has meant there's capacity in that team not just to do the work on the ground, but to do the long-term thinking. So that plan is in place. We were looking at GPEx just a couple of meetings ago at what needs to be in place by the end of this month, what needs to be in place by the end of August, what needs to be in place by the autumn to enable us to be ready for a general election. And that's a situation that's really familiar to me, because when I was chief exec of the party, it was that period when Gordon Brown was prime minister, and at any point he could have called a general election, and he waited until the very last minute, obviously, to go in 2010 with disastrous results for the country. But for us as a party, we spent those 3 years going, have we got the paper ordered so that we can print millions of free post leaflets at short notice? So I'm familiar with the kind of detailed logistics that need to be done. Fortunately, now we have a much larger team of staff to do that. And so the critical thing from the The non-staff side of things is to look, I think, at the election readiness of local parties, and that's both in terms of, have people got target wards identified that they can use the general election to build up their candidates for future local elections? Have they got plans to go and help in our target seats? Because if we've seen anything in the last few months, no, you only have to look at Wakefield and Tiverton and Hoddesdon to see the value of piling in loads and loads of activists to make a difference. And that's something which we can definitely get better at as a party. And then the other thing which we need to start on now, and I'm confident that information is about to be going out to local parties about this, is about candidate selection. And one of the things that I'm absolutely certain about is that we need to make sure that at the next general election, there aren't any media stories saying Green Party is whiter than UKIP or Green Party is whiter than the Tories. That's only one aspect of the diversity that we need to reflect, but we've just commissioned a significant piece of work, which we might come on to talk about, which addresses some of those concerns that we have as a party. But we fail at the moment to adequately reflect the communities we want to serve. And there's a huge piece of work to be done to support local parties in ensuring that we select a range of candidates that reflect the diversity of the country that we hope to serve.
So you're right, I do want to talk about the Diverse Matters report, but I'm going to park that for a moment to pick up on one of the other things that you talked about there, which was around staff. So there, some people watching may not be aware, but GPEx is essentially the body which is the kind of employer of staff within the Green Party, and sort of sits at the top of the hierarchy of the line management structure through the CEO. How do you think that GPEx could be better supporting the Green Party staff team?
So ultimately, we have an executive that's structured for a party that existed in 1990, not for the party that exists now. So one of the things that we can do, setting aside the longer term structural reform, which I think we need, is we can start to act much more like a board who have a collective responsibility as an employer and the body charged with delivering the party's political strategy, and much less like a group of individuals who are elected to specific portfolios. That doesn't help us to provide the leadership and the guidance that the staff team need. But on a more practical level, the most important thing we can do is ensure that the party has a fundraising, development, income generation, whatever term you wish to use, focus. At the moment, we are operating on the margins. Basically, we have barely enough capacity in some critical areas. As I said, we've got a really strong elections team. I'm absolutely confident if you ask Chris Williams, head of elections, he could reel 10 more jobs that we could create that would make that team even more effective. But we have to do both. We have to make sure that we deliver our electoral focus, but also that we provide the infrastructure and support that's necessary to go with that. So that means we have to have the finance team in place that supports local party treasurers. We have to have in place the comms team that makes sure that we maximise the success of all of the elected Greens around the country, which is, the comms team is not much bigger than it was when I was in the party office. Clearly, we've got hundreds of elected councillors now in the way we didn't before. And so unless we can generate a diverse income stream, this isn't about going back to members and asking them for more money. This is about finding other sources of income to increase that infrastructure capacity so that we can put in place those things behind the scenes. And that might mean making the members' website easier to use so that people can get engaged more easily. We can use the tools to mobilize people and take them where they need to be for elections. We've been talking for over a decade about having a national canvassing system. I was recently in a by-election in Hackney using their telling and polling day apps, which have been developed locally and are fantastic, but we should have those as a given everywhere. And at the moment, we don't have the resources to really build that critical infrastructure. And it's absolutely vital that GPEx delivers the resources to enable staff to do their jobs.
So I want to move on to a kind of broader question about GPEx and its relationship to the rest of the party and the membership. And I think if you were to speak to your kind of average member, um, with like relatively, medium levels of engagement with the party, they might occasionally go to a local party meeting or social, deliver a couple of leaflets every now and then if they're into an election, or whatever. I would guess that 99% of those types of members have no idea what GPEx is, have no sense of who sits on it or why it's important and what it does and how it supports the kind of objectives and the strategy and the kind of vision of the party as a whole. There's definitely, I mean, it's evidence from the turnout in GPEx elections, which are incredibly low, and if there's not a leadership election going on alongside those GPEx elections, it's even lower. So if you were elected as chair, how would you work to kind of improve the level of engagement with an understanding of GPEx and the work that it does, and the wider membership, and support more people to be engaging with the party on a kind of central level?
So I think part of the problem is what I alluded to before, that GPEx is currently not fit for purpose. So we elect people to portfolios that were created in the 1990s for roles that needed to be done then. And we don't elect people to have collective responsibility for the governance, the management of the party. And so I think being really clear about what the role of GPEx is and making it clear that part of that role is not just about doing the work, but about communicating the work to the rest of the party is a key thing that I want to be doing as chair. So at the moment, we have individuals working in a range of different areas, reporting into GPEx, and then once a year they report to conference. As I've mentioned before, we don't have a really high quality internal communications infrastructure in terms of the party members' website. So even when things do go up there, it's not necessarily always easy for people to find. So some of those areas, some of those things like rebuilding that website, that's a cost, that's going to take time. But some of the things like making better use of social media and making better use of the time we have at conference to make people aware of the role of GPEx is critical. But also we need to recognise that the vast majority of members don't go to conference either. And so we need to be really creative, I think, in terms of thinking about how GPEx members can be held accountable and how they can feel that accountability, because there's, as you say, that lack of communication goes two ways. I think if GPEx members aren't engaged with the wider membership, they can't really do their job very well.
Viewers who are watching the next of these questions, you might notice that John's headset has changed. That's not magic. There wasn't a trick involved. There was a technical glitch, and we've recorded this in two parts. So if anyone was confused by that, that is why. So what do you think the top priority for GPEx should be over the next 2 years?
So I set out three things in my statement, which I think are the key priorities. And I think we've talked a bit about the first one already in terms of structure, but critically, the structure is a necessary precondition. It's not the solution in itself. And we have to not only change the structures, but more critically, we have to change the culture. And actually, in some ways, we can start to make those changes before we do the structural change. So we don't have to wait for some constitutional change process to go through the conference. We can start to work differently and work in the way that we need to work to make the party executive an effective servant of the party. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to respond seriously, credibly, and with a significant amount of energy to the Diverse Matters report, which we've referred to. So that for those who don't know, the party executive have recently commissioned a report from an external consultant to say, do an audit for us, tell us how we're performing. We don't think we're doing everything we could be. Let's put it in the mildest possible terms. Where are we falling down? Where could we be doing better? And they've come back with a series of recommendations for us. And we absolutely have to take that on board. We have to not just ensure that we improve the diversity of the party, but that we go the step beyond that and make sure that we don't just have people in the room, but that they're included, their voices are made space for, and that they're heard in the decision making at the core of the party. So that's an absolutely critical piece of work for helping us become the next generation Green Party, the one that genuinely can represent all parts of the country and can increase our number of councillors even more and increase our number of MPs, because people see us as a credible party of local and hopefully in the longer term national government. And then the third area, which again I've touched on already, is about resourcing, because we can't achieve the step change that we need in the party's capacity and the party's culture with the same level of resources. Whilst we are absolutely struggling to do the bare minimum with the resources we have, we cannot take those resources and put them into other things. And what I don't want us to do is to get into a false dichotomy where we're going, well, should we put money into elections or should we put money into the structure of the parties? We can't make that choice. We have to do both. We have to make the party a better governed, more inclusive, more representative body, because that's a key part of achieving our electoral goals. And if we don't have those bold electoral goals, then it doesn't matter how inclusive and welcoming we are, people will just see us as ineffective and won't want to have anything to do with us. So we've got to do both. And that means we've got to find additional sources of income. We've got to diversify our income streams. And we've got to then allocate those resources in the areas that are going to have most impact as we go on that journey to becoming a better Green Party.
So sticking with the question of diversity within the party, we currently have a deputy leadership election going on at the moment, and all 4 of the candidates standing in that election are men from London. We also, as you've alluded to earlier, there's been long-running issues in the party around racial diversity, particularly when it comes to, for example, elected representatives, people sitting on governance bodies, committees at a local or regional or national level, and so on. And we also have at the moment a situation where the scourge of transphobia that's being whipped up by the right-wing press, and increasingly now the Tories, we have a Tory leadership election going on at the moment where all but one of the candidates, I believe, has used kind of anti-trans and anti-LGBT rhetoric within their campaigning, and some of that that scourge has started to infect parts of the party as well. You've mentioned the Diverse Matters report and the kind of recommendations that are within that, but what practical steps do you think that you can take as chair of GPEx to kind of drive a diversification within the party?
So for me, I think the thing we can start with is the culture, and we can start by modeling the culture that we want in the party. I'm very clear that we want to live out our own values as set out on a philosophical basis, that we want to be a welcoming, inclusive party, and that we want to reflect the communities that we serve. Now, as I said earlier, there's a critical difference between diversity and inclusion. It's not enough just to have people in the room. Their voices have to be heard, and people who look like me have to make space for those voices to be heard. And if, it will be obvious to anyone who's looking at this or anyone who knows me, and some of these things will be more, some of these will be less obvious, but if you were to take the Equalities Act 9 protected characteristics checklist, it won't surprise you to know that I don't tick any of those boxes. And what that does mean is that because of the nature of the racist, imperialist, patriarchal society that the Green Party exists within, I have a degree of power and privilege that some of our members don't unfortunately have that they deserve. And so it's incumbent on me and people like me to use that power, that influence, that privilege to make space, to enable people's voices to be heard, to stand with people and not try to speak for people. It's absolutely crucial that we start to model that culture, and then we start to embed that into the systems. Some of the things that Diverse Matters recommend we can start work on tomorrow. Some of them are much more significant and will take time. And the most important first step for me is to do that piece of triage work to say, okay, what can we do now that will have an immediate impact, and what do we need to plan and invest in to make the longer term impact going down the road? Because the party, as every individual in the party, is on a journey on all of these issues. I certainly feel better educated on these issues than I did before I joined GPEx. It's amazing. With the current GPEx, we have 4 Black members of GPEx whose voices I really value and contribution I really value. We have a couple of disabled members of GPEx who bring things that are outside of my lived experience that I wouldn't consider because I have no knowledge of them if they weren't there. But we cannot rely on those who are minoritized by our systems to do the heavy lifting. It has to also fall to those who look like me to step in and be an ally. And that's absolutely the starting point. It's not enough, but it's a starting point. And that's where I would want to start.
Got one serious question left before I have a kind of sort of flippant one to finish on. So the serious question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the Green Party right now?
In the grand scheme of things, I would probably say the electoral system, but actually in terms of what this role can do, I would say it's the lack of a fundraising culture. What all of the things we've been talking about today, whether that's more support for local parties, whether that's an improved engagement in our internal governments, whether it's increasing the diversity and inclusion in our party, all of those things need us to put resource behind them. And at the moment, we don't have that resource, we don't have the capacity. And in part, it's because we don't have that culture of saying, okay, well, where can we find that money, beyond going and asking members? And if we have a reticence about generating the income that enables us to make the changes that we need to make in the party so that the party can make the changes that need to be made in the world, then we're never going to get anywhere. Fundraising is not the most important thing we do, but it underpins everything else we do. And if we don't secure those sustainable income streams in line with our values, then we will continually struggle to do the things that are most important to us and make the difference that we exist to make.
So my final question, hopefully straightforward. Who in the Green Party inspires you the most?
I'm going to pick a slightly sentimental one, and this person, for reasons over a couple of years, isn't in the Green Party anymore. I was at the funeral a couple of weeks ago of Charlie Kiss, who was our candidate for Islington South in 2015, and I was really proud to be a core part of his campaign. He was the first trans man to stand for Parliament for any major political party, and working with him on the streets of Islington South, and at the time there was a very major issue going on in the community with a young man who had been killed in a police chase, and Charlie was able to engage with the family of that young man in a way that I've never seen another Green politician do. He was so down to earth and so just able to engage with people where they were coming from, not have any judgment about them. He definitely did not tick the middle class, university educated stereotype that we sometimes have, although he had gone back to college and got a degree. But that's something he'd achieved despite the challenges in his life. And I think he is definitely the person I'm most inspired by.
Charlie Kiss is much missed by many people on the left in the Green Party and the Labour Party and elsewhere. And Caroline Russell gave a reading at Charlie Kiss's funeral, which she kindly allowed Bright Green to republish. So if people want to learn more about Charlie, you can head to Bright Green's website and read that there. So we're going to finish there, Jon. But before I let everyone go, where can people find out more about your campaign?
So I'm not a massive one for social media, but if you look for at Jon Nott, JONNOTT on Twitter, or if you search for Jon Nott on Facebook, you should find at least some stuff. I don't promise to be the most engaged on social media, but that's a good starting point.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for agreeing to have a chat today, Jon. And before everyone else leaves, I just have a few final bits and pieces of admin to do before you head off. The first of which is something that I said at the beginning of this interview, and I'm going to say it again now, which is that if you've enjoyed this, if you found it to be valuable and useful in forming your decision-making in voting in the GPEx election, if you're a member of the Green Party, then please do scroll down and hit that subscribe button. On Bright Green's YouTube channel, you can find all the interviews we've already put out with the other candidates, and there'll be many more to come over the coming days and weeks. The second thing I wanted to remind you to do is we've talked about a lot of things over the last sort of 30 minutes, and there'll be plenty there in there that you agree with. I'm sure there may also be things in there that you disagree with. Please do let us know your thoughts in the comments down below and keep the conversation going there. The penultimate thing I have to let you know is you may or may not be aware that Bright Green doesn't have the backing of billionaires or big business. We solely rely on the generous and kind donations and contributions of people like you. So if you are able to, please do head to bright-green.org/donate and set up a regular donation so that we continue to put out videos like this, to continue to run all of our news and analysis and comment pieces on our website, and keep Bright Green growing and growing. And finally, we are running news articles, comment pieces, analysis of the GPEx elections and the deputy leadership election that is going on alongside it. You can find all of that on our website, which is bright-green.org, if you want to check out more of our coverage of the campaign. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very, very soon.